Questions and doubts are a common and necessary part of every journey. They help find the best answers to life's hard questions and to challenge long-held beliefs that might not actually be true or proven or healthy. They can keep us from harm or help us to escape bad situations. Sometimes our questions and doubts can set us free, but they aren't easy, and these trying times can make us feel even more disconnected, desperate, and alone. But you are not alone. Recovering from Religion is an organization comprised of people just like you, people who have asked questions, who understand doubt, who can help you navigate through the confusion, and who are genuinely there to help. 24 hours a day, any day, you can reach out for encouragement and support on the telephone or via online chat. And RfR even provides online communities to connect with others just like you, even if you choose to do so anonymously. Recovering from Religion is a safe place where you can reach out, explore your questions, converse with a friend, and be completely yourself without fear. No judgment, no rejection, just an opportunity to connect with someone who understands. There's no reason to go it alone. Recovering from Religion is ready whenever you are. Reach out today at recoveringfromreligion.org.
Welcome, everybody. I am Todd Yoder. I'm your co-host, along with Eric Wells. Eric Wells is the director of our support groups. We are so glad that you all could join us today. With our RfRx Talks is what we're calling them, we want to bring on guests to discuss topics that may be relevant to everyone that's here. This is by no means a replacement of our online community or our support meetup groups, but instead we want it to be designed to complement these communities and to provide some good advice and coping skills that we can all find useful during this time. You know, Eric, our mission with Recovering from Religion is that we want to offer hope, healing, and support to people that are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And I want to talk about that just real briefly. How are we providing those things, hope, healing, and support to people that reach out to us?
I love it. I love it. So the hope, it comes from hearing the personal stories of others. If they can make it, like reading some of our blog posts, I can see these stories and I'm thinking to myself, if this person can make it, then I can sure make it. And we focus on sharing individual stories on our blog and the podcast.
Absolutely. And then we offer our healing through what we do on the Helpline. Having someone available who will listen to our struggles without criticism or judgment, and using a caring ear. Then to offer resources to help us or that person to figure out the things for themselves. That's where the healing comes from.
Yeah, and we offer support in two different ways. The first is through peer support with the in-person meetings of the support group program and our private online chat community. People sharing their stories along with sharing resources that they found helpful with one another. The second way we support these individuals is by connecting them with a licensed secular mental health care provider through the Secular Therapy Project. These therapists have been carefully screened by dedicated secular mental health clinicians based on 3 separate criteria. 1, they have appropriate licensing in their state and or country. 2, they maintain a secular practice, so there's no worry about being proselytized to. Man, I am just stumbling over the words like no tomorrow. This is going so good. And the third criteria is exclusive use of evidence-based treatments. These therapists need to be using the most current and up-to-date evidence-based treatments.
Well, I want to back up just a second and talk about another place where healing comes from. It's oftentimes overlooked. I really think that we offer more to those who volunteer with us than those people that actually reach out to us. Our volunteers are finding so much meaning and purpose in helping others, not to mention the community that we're building. It's just out of this world. And you know what? Everyone here could be a part of that. If you would be interested in volunteering with us, you can find us on the volunteer tab on our website.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really cool. Todd, you and I have been volunteering for quite a while, and to be perfectly honest, I feel like I've gotten more out of the volunteering than I've actually put into it. It's something that you know, when I came out of when I was in religion, I was supposed to be searching for a purpose and trying to find some hidden geocache purpose game that God had put up for me, but with now I get to create my purpose, and RFR fits so well into that.
Absolutely, yeah. I love
So
it.
our last talk on RFRX was really fantastic. It talked about how we can work with our how we can be mentally healthy in this time of social isolation. How is some of the tips and tricks that Darrel talked about? How has it helped or not helped you in the past week or so?
Things are good. I'm learning to not feed myself so much, limit my intake from the news media and stuff. So that helps a lot, I think. It's like he said, you know, it's like giving yourself an adrenaline shot if you keep feeding that stuff to you. And so that's helped keep me more calm. How about you? Did you go to the store today?
I did go to the store.
How'd that go?
Yeah, last time I shared a story about being so anxious about going to the store, and then when I came back, just it taking several hours to realize how afraid I was and truly scared I was. It took several hours, and I was like acting so weird. And went to the store again today, as a matter of fact, and I come back and I'm not feeling that way at all. I really took what Dr. Ray had to say to heart, and was able to quickly recognize the stuff. So
how did you find the people in the stores? Were they being cautious?
Yeah, actually compared to last time, what was kind of neat is Dr. Ray was talking about, hey, you can't do anything about what other people are doing. And so, you know, I was kind of going there expecting to, that everybody would be punks and not having their social distance or their mask on. But sure enough, there were so many people with the masks on. The people who didn't have masks on were in the minority. And the social distancing was really acknowledged and taken to heart by all the shoppers with their shopping carts. I got to notice people would be more attentive to other people, like, oh, you're waiting on me to pass. I will go ahead and hurry up in order to accommodate you. It was a completely different experience this time than it was last time.
Very nice. I'm glad. It sounds like we both found meaning in some things that could help us. I hope everyone here has experienced the same thing. Let's get on to tonight's topic. Eric, would you be introduce Dr. Darrel Ray to everyone again?
Yeah. Before I do, I'm going to open up a poll that has to do with today's talk. So if you wouldn't mind, kind of take a look at this poll and answer it however you see fit. And again, it has some topics that we're going to be talking about tonight. But like you asked me to, Todd, I will introduce Darrel Ray. Dr. Darrel Ray is the founder and president of Recovering from Religion. He's been a psychologist for over 30 years. You know, Todd, that's almost longer than I've been alive. And he is the author of 4 books, including The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture, and also a book called Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. Dr. Ray has been a student of religion for most of his life, and he holds a master's degree in religion, as well as a bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology with a doctorate in psychology. So I kind of think he knows what he is talking about.
Maybe just a little bit. Welcome back, Dr. Darrel Ray. It's so good to have you again. Tonight, we want to talk about what psychology can tell us about our own mental functioning in times of crisis. But before we get into that, I would want to know if you could give us a brief description and breakdown of what psychology is and what its and why is it helpful for us to understand it.
Well, thanks, guys. First of all, I want to say we've got a bunch of volunteers in our audience. I just want to say thank you for all you're doing for all the clients, our chat line leaders, our phone people, our board members. I see a whole bunch of people from our different parts of RFR anyway. Just want to say a big heartfelt thank you for all you're doing. We've got some new people on here as well. that are actually just joining us, and hopefully they'll become important parts of what we're doing as well. So everybody hear me okay? Eric, Todd?
Yeah, you're sounding really great.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, I've been a psychologist. Actually, if I count it, it's more than 30 years, but we're not going to count. So, and what I found is the more I understand about how humans behave and about the psychology of our brains and why our brains work the way they do, the easier it is to live a productive and happy life. Because I feel like my goal is to help all of our listeners here today gain some sense of control in an environment that seems out of control and is in fact out of control in some ways. So I think that's the importance of what psychology has to offer us here today, Todd, is a sense of let's be aware of how we actually function as psychological beings, as animals within this planet. I mean, we are animals and we respond like animals. I'm going to talk about that a bit today because animal research actually informs some of how we respond to our environment. That sufficient for you, Todd?
Yes, thanks for sharing that.
Hey, I forgot to mention also, all you wonderful folks, all you wonderful folks there who are tuning in, if you happen to have a question for Dr. Ray or about the discussion, if you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat. I will get them pulled out and we will ask him during the Q&A part. In addition to that, at the end, we're going to have a social hangout for about 30 minutes, 30 minutes, where all of you guys will be unmuted. We're all going to be able to get to say hi to one another and hang out, and just like you might do with your regular family. So feel free to answer some or ask some questions, and we'll get them answered for you. All right, where were we? We got the definition of psychology down. What's next?
Well, I'll just jump in here unless you had something to say there, Todd.
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. So I want to frame this briefly for everyone listening tonight, and that is, I feel an old saying my grandmother used to tell me was, "Forewarned is forearmed." Forewarned is forearmed. I want to forewarn you tonight so that you are forearmed about some things that we are already seeing in this COVID-19 virus pandemic, and you can mentally prepare in ways that, and you may actually be able to prepare people you love as well. So that's the framework for where I'm going to be working tonight. And Eric and Todd and I are going to kind of go back and forth a little bit occasionally. And Todd's got some interesting stories that I think fit right into where I want to go tonight. There are viruses out there. There are literally probably millions, maybe even billions of biological viruses out there. And they all want to they want to have a place to live and propagate and move on to the next victim, if you will. That virus could be COVID-19, or it could be smallpox, or it could be measles. So we see all these viruses out there. Excuse me. But there's another kind of virus out there, and if you've read my book, The God Virus, you'll know that there are mind viruses out there. And there are thousands, even millions of mind viruses that want to get into our brains. And those mind viruses cannot live, cannot propagate, cannot move on to live, if you will, unless they have a brain to get into. They're like a parasite. A parasite needs to get into our bodies. A virus needs to get into our bodies in order to move on to the next body. Well, mind viruses do the same thing. And there are parasitic mind viruses. Most mind viruses are parasitic, by the way. However, I don't want to oversimplify this, but I think the metaphor helps us understand why what I'm going to talk about is important tonight. I want us to practice good mental hygiene. We wash our hands, we take showers, we make sure we use good social distancing. But, I saw something the other day. It says, this person said, I practice social distancing around religious people. I am practicing social distancing around religious people who went to church this Sunday. And oh, by the way, it's probably a good idea to do that all the time. That's interesting. Have you ever noticed that religious people oftentimes use the terms of infection and disease and filth around people who do not think like themselves?
Yeah.
And they talk about gay people or LGBT people or people who are of other religions like they were, and they use terms that are literally, they are filthy, they're diseased. You don't want to get infected with, the Jehovah's Witness or whatever. You actually hear. And I'm just, for maybe show of hands.
I remember this back in the 80s. It's nothing new. They've been doing this for centuries. I remember back in the 80s when the AIDS crisis was happening and the church was just railing against homosexuals and blaming them for and their lifestyle for the outbreak, when not at all what was going on.
What this tells us is even the religious understand this concept of a mind virus. But what I'm here to tell you is that there are lots of viruses out there and they all want to get into us, biological. There are lots of mind viruses and they all want to get into us. And they want to get into us so they can get into the next person. There's a certain time and place in which it's easy or easier to get infected with mind viruses. And that's what I want to talk about today.
Oh, okay.
We all know that, when you get kind of down, you're not using proper nutrition, you might exercise as much, those kind of things, you are more likely to get, or if your immune system is compromised in some way, you're more likely to get infected with a biological virus or a biological germ of some kind. Well, we're the same way in our mental state. Most of us are in a fairly normal, stable mental state most of the time. But if our immune system, I call it our mental immune system or our psychological immune system, is compromised in some way, for example, if we get under a lot of stress, I bet most of you would agree with me that when you're under a lot of stress, you don't make your best decisions.
Yeah. So I don't at all think, when I'm under a lot of stress, I don't necessarily think rationally.
Right. And you can make some really bad decisions when you're under stress.
Yes.
And that is the best time to infect you with a new parasitic, if you will, mind virus. And that's why it's important for us to think about what kind of a time are we living in now? How much stress is there in our environment? How much chaos? And why are all of a sudden we seeing ministers having church on Sunday even after they were told not to by the governmental officials, and religious officials saying we're trying to take their religious rights away from them, when in fact all we're trying to do is keep them safe? What is going on there? And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Well, this will be really interesting. I've already got some thoughts going in my head that I can see already how what you just said in the short time, how it's affected my life. But yeah.
So we're going to be talking about mental hygiene, and that is understanding what kind of things might try to attack us. You turn the TV on, you will see basically two kinds of mind viruses. And they come out, there's like an epidemic of mind viruses right now, because biological viruses and mind viruses oftentimes work together. I know it sounds weird. It sounds really strange. If you want the full version, and yes, I am pumping my book, The God Virus, because that's what we're talking about here today, is how do viruses get in our heads and then change our behavior? Let me give you a great example. If you get infected enough with a Catholic mind virus, you become celibate. You don't get married. You don't have children. That is pretty crazy behavior. When people say, we just want to, we're the more abnormal people as atheists because we don't want to follow all the norms around sexuality that the Catholics push on us, I'll turn right around and say, well, I can't think of anything more abnormal or perverted than being celibate for your whole life. Well, why is it important for a priest to stay celibate? Largely because priests are very expensive to develop, and they're the primary way that you infect new people with the Catholic mind virus. That's why we're seeing at this point in time so many churches defying secular orders, because how do you perpetuate their Baptist mind virus or Pentecostal mind virus or whatever the virus is they're trying to push if you don't have group meetings? And when they come together, they not only give each other the COVID-19 virus, they're reinforcing the Pentecostal virus or the Baptist or the Catholic or, whatever virus it was. I mean, Italy had to get the police out to stop priests from going and visiting the sick. That's like the worst thing you could do is go visit somebody sick and then go to somebody else's house. You're going to just systematically, it's like the best way to systematically infect an entire culture with a biological virus. And it's done in the name of a mind virus. You see how these two things work together?
Yeah.
It's actually a brilliant strategy if you think about it from a religious point of view. When the conquistadors went into South America and Central America, they brought their priests with them. And if you didn't die from smallpox, you would be killed by the soldiers. And then if you survived that, they would say, well, God saved you, so you better convert or we'll kill you anyway. So again, it's the smallpox. And we saw this throughout North America with North American Native Americans.
Right.
Throughout history, we see the way viruses work with mind viruses to infect people. And we want to stay away from that. We want to practice social distancing around some of these crazy ideas.
Now, why would someone want to, let's say I'm a individual who goes to church every Sunday. Why would someone want to put themselves at risk in order to, is that kind of how the virus works? If I were to show up to church on Sunday amidst this viral outbreak, this pandemic, why would I put myself at risk like that?
Because you've been taught since you were a small child, and that's the important component. We talked about this earlier. Small child, that the most important thing in your whole life is your afterlife, and that you're not going to go to heaven, or you're going to go burn in hell forever if you don't perform your duties in this life. Well, one of the key duties is to follow whatever the minister or the priest or the pope or the imam or the Buddhist monk tells you to do. You're not going to get to the next life, or you're not going to get where you want to go in the next life without that. So if you truly believe, and as you know, many of you have come through our chat line, you've seen so many people talk about fear of hell. Well, if you are scared shitless of hell, and you better go to church or you're going to hell, that'll get you to church. You would rather die of the virus than die in hell. That's a pretty strong, it's very strong. And I want to talk about how that comes. You look around yourself, and in psychology, we have an idea called social signaling. When we're in a group, we are very attentive as human beings. Most of us, not all of us, but most of us are very attentive to our social environment. And when we see, for example, let's just say let's say there's 30 of us in a group, and somebody suddenly looks up and points their finger somewhere. What will you do?
Oh, gotta look. Yeah.
Every person in that room, look at Todd. Every person in that room will change and look. That's social signaling. One person is signaling the entire rest of the group. We see this in monkey troops, in chimpanzee troops. Almost all primates have social signaling. It's a great way to stay safe, because if I do this and there's a tiger ready to eat somebody in the group, it means we can defend ourselves. So It goes way, way deep into our psyche. But if the social signaling is, we need to stay safe, and the preacher says staying safe is in our group, in our tribe, because the tribe is where safety comes from in our deep genetic history, then we're going to follow what the priest says, and we're going to watch for the social signals. And the social signals can be extremely powerful, especially the social signals that you get if you don't follow the priest, if you don't follow the group, and you're cast out. I mean, Shanna Rubio's on our board. She's here tonight, ex-Jehovah's Witness, and she can tell you how strong the negative social signaling is among Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'm guessing if the Jehovah's Witness says you go anyway, you do it. And we already see it. The social signaling is really strong around things like blood transfusion among Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, the reason I'm speaking about social signaling right now is because all of us are in a culture, in a social environment, and that environment is socially signaling to us. And I love, you didn't even know you were giving me a great example, Eric, but earlier you gave me a great example. Last week you went to the store and nobody was wearing a damn mask. This week you go to the store and the majority of the people are wearing masks.
Yeah.
That is a social signal. Now, in this case, a very positive social signal. What you see is evidence that there's a positive secular social signal being picked up and followed by the other people in your society.
Yeah, it was interesting as for a moment, I felt like I was in a completely different culture. I almost felt like walking through this supermarket would be very similar to what I might experience if I was walking through a supermarket in a culture that has face masks as a norm, like in China or something like that.
And here's a funny thing is a week ago, Eric, when you went, you were like the only one wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Today you went and everyone is. I bet you the people that weren't wearing the mask today were feeling like they were out of place because they were the minority probably.
Yeah. And another thing is too, obviously, I'm a trendsetter, so.
Oh, that's true. We saw pictures.
Yeah, well, we're not going to say what other kind of trends Eric has said in his distant past, though.
Just for everyone to know, Eric shared a Easter picture of him when he was like 7 or 8 years old, and his outfit was to die for.
No, this is being recorded, and it'll be there forever now. Thank you, Todd.
Oh yeah, no worries.
After we're finished with this part of the talk, before the Q&A, maybe we can get Eric to show us his
Was that what? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, now I want to talk about how our brains are working. I could talk about just social signaling. I could talk about it all night. And we've got a ton to go over tonight, so I want to keep moving forward on some of the key things. I want to introduce you to two pieces in your brain. One is called the amygdala, and the other is the hippocampus. I mean, you don't have to remember these, and I'm going to absolutely oversimplify this. So I know we've got a couple, Ed is in our audience, psychologist, so forgive me if I way oversimplify it. But I'm going to do that in the interest of just trying to help us understand what's going on in our brain. Right now, we have got a lot of things around us that are signaling to us, both socially and psychologically, emotionally, and physically, that there's potential danger around us. And that comes straight into the amygdala of our brain. The amygdala is highly involved in fear assessment. It's also involved in good things like positive assessments, but the first place we process fear seems to be in the amygdala. And what we've got is a culture that's constantly trying to make us afraid. And why is that? Because if we're afraid, we're more easily infected with new ideas. Fox News has created an entire methodology around keeping people's amygdala fired up. I mean, literally, if you put them on a machine and look, you probably see a bright red glow inside of some of these people's heads. Again, I exaggerate, of course, but
now it seems like, from what I'm hearing, this virus, this mental virus you're talking about, also seems to disable the critical thinking part of our brain too.
It absolutely does. I mean, just like we said real early on, when you're under a lot of stress, you don't make your best decisions or your best choices. And what happens when we're constantly being stimulated in a direction of fearfulness? Some people, well, I'm talking about this a little bit later, some people are more susceptible to fear messages than other people are. And some people it's really hard to stimulate them there. Other people, it's really easy to stimulate them there. Probably 20 to 30% of the population are pretty easily influenced by fear messages. I mean, it's like anything else. You've got a normal distribution within a population, and that's kind of what we see here. So somebody who wants you to do what they want you to do are best able to do that by going through the fear channel. And I'm going to come back and talk about that in detail.
Okay.
But if I can get to your brain through the fear channel, I can then infect you with new ideas and get you to vote the way I want you to vote, or I can get you to give money to the place I want you to give money, or go out and knock on doors. I mean, there's a lot of things I can get you to do if you are afraid. And that's why fear of hell is such an effective tool, because it really fires up the amygdala. And then it creates in another part of our brain, the hippocampus, a map. We create maps in our head. And when I mean a map, I mean a literal map, because you can get in your car and drive all over your local area without a map because you've got one in your head. You also have social maps. When you walk into a room, we oftentimes look around and assess who is in that room, and we create a social map of, you know, who's clearly the dominant person in the room, who's the most attractive opposite sex person in the room. There's all these things that come in, and we create a very quick map of our social environment. We're really good at that as human beings.
Yeah, oh, that's a great way to look at it, because I do that exact same thing. People are putting out social cues, and I'm starting to map that as this person does this person does that. I had never thought of it as akin to a road map or something like that.
It is. And when you walk into a church, you will quickly assess who's the alpha male in that church. And it's almost always the minister or maybe one of the elders. If you walk into a political rally or something, or political, you'll look around, you'll find out who's the alpha person in that room. And it's generally, of course, the candidate. Doesn't always have to be that way. But so we're creating these social maps within churches, within political environments, within our neighborhood. I mean, you know who the person in your neighborhood that's leading the neighborhood watch, if you will, or the one that always puts on the best parties in your neighborhood. And those become a part of the landscape of your social map. And it's important for us to recognize that other people are putting maps into our heads. If you're a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon, somebody from a very early time in your life probably put a map in your head. And that map says you have to wear magic underwear, for example. Now, when I use the term map, I mean map in the sense of your view of the world. It doesn't mean it's reality-based. It doesn't mean it's got anything to do with reality. I mean, wearing magic underwear probably isn't reality-based. Or not getting a blood transfusion could be deadly. But those are part of the map of the Mormons, or the part of the map of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And every religion creates a map of reality that you put in your head. And then when you go to church, or when you go to Bible study, when you go to any kind of religious organization, that map is reinforced because everybody shares that map around you. And a lot of people I know, I see them talking about, I was in the Catholic bubble, or I was in the Catholic or the Baptist bubble. You all have heard them people use the word bubble, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
I use it all the time.
Yeah, and I don't see anything wrong with that terminology, but I tend to look at it more as a map. You have a Catholic map. You have a Baptist map. And those maps do not map to reality. I mean, think about it. If I had a map of my home state, Kansas, from 1900, and I tried to get in my car and drive somewhere using just that map, I'd probably go into a river somewhere real quick. because that map, it does not map to the current reality. Catholics, Baptists, Buddhists, you know, you name it, communists, even capitalists, it doesn't matter. Whatever ideology you subscribe to creates a map that you put into your head. Some of those maps map to reality better than other maps do. And the bad maps really cause you trouble. Bad maps cause breakdowns in relationships, cause anxiety, cause mental illness, because if you're constantly banging your head against reality, because your map in your head does not map to what reality is, you're going to be a problem. I don't know how many people have told me when they came into recovering from religion that they finally realized that Noah didn't really exist. There was really not a flood. There was no ark. And
yeah, that is exactly what happened with me. At 16, I read a book by Isaac Asimov, the Encyclopedia of Science and Discovery, and it covered everything from the discovery of fire all the way up to the mid 80s, where they finished up Fermat's last theorem or whatever. And I could no longer square reality presented in this book with the map I was given with religion, and I gave it up because they just didn't mesh any longer.
Right, and now I would guess you would say no one has a perfect map of reality. Let's just be, nobody does.
I don't.
But I'm guessing you have a more accurate map of the reality you live in now than you had before. You no longer believe there was a flood. You don't believe the earth is flat. You know, there's a lot of, you believe in the genes theory or the germ theory. You believe evolution is really a fact and not just a theory. I mean, all those things you probably adopted because you've created a new map that maps to reality better.
And one of the things that I've put into place is what Matt Dillahunty says is to accept as many true things as possible and reject as many false things as possible. So that I feel that is just a recent thing within the last, I don't know, 7-8 years or something. That is now something that when some fact or some data comes to me, I parse it through that filter to determine whether it's true and I accept it, or false and then I reject it.
Right.
That's the neat thing about it too, is that when we hold a map in our mind, it's open with an open mind that we might be wrong and we can adjust it. As before, we were dogma about it, and this is the way it is, and there's no other way around it. And this way is such a better way of living.
Right. I just saw, for example, on our chat here, somebody asked, are there any tips about how to make sure the maps are accurate? And let me just say this. Our maps, we should, I don't know about you, but I use my phone a lot for my GPS. You know, pull my GPS out and I go everywhere with it. And about 10 or 15 years ago, you could get lost with a GPS. But I don't get lost near as much, and usually it's operator error. It's my own fault nowadays. It's not the GPS's fault. But here's the deal: Apple and Google and Garmin, all those companies have got a system for updating their maps in almost real time.
Yeah.
Now think about this: that map that's in my iPhone right now, it is constantly updating. Even as we're sitting here talking, there's probably some updates going. But the whole map is not updated, just a small part of it. You know, some road construction over here, a policeman has pulled somebody over there. That's a very temporary change in the map. And we as humans are capable of making vast changes to our maps without changing the basic structure. But therein, I want to move to a new topic here, and I'm going to build on the basic structure and the constant updating of the map. We have to constantly update our maps because our culture is always changing. And if you look around us, I mean, just in the last month, our culture has massively changed.
Yeah.
So we have a whole new map about how do you survive, stay healthy, keep our loved ones healthy, deal with our finances. And there's a lot of things that have changed in our map. And most of us are probably being fairly successful. And we want to be more successful. That's why we're talking here tonight. So I want to move forward and if any of you ever took a course in psychology, you probably studied about a man named Pavlov. Pavlov, I'm about to tell you something about Pavlov that almost nobody knows. Pavlov discovered something really, really important after Stalin took over Russia. And of course, we know about Pavlov and the dogs and salivation and conditioned responses. So all that stuff we people teach in Psychology 101 in almost even high school these days. But after Pavlov disappeared behind the Iron Curtain, we didn't hear as much from him and what he was doing. And yet he continued to have a world-class laboratory where he was working with dogs. One day, there was a flood in his laboratory, and the waters rose and rose and rose. And finally, somebody discovered what was going to happen, or were able to get in during the flood and release the doors from the dogs' kennels and let the dogs out to rescue the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So the interesting thing that Pavlov observed was they had very careful notes on the personalities of these dogs. You know, there's 4 basic personality types among dogs. And he had noted very carefully all these personality types. And what he found was 2 of the 4 personality types were traumatized by the flood. These dogs all experienced the same traumatic event of about being drowned. I mean, their noses were literally above the water, barely.
Wow.
And so he noticed this. So he decided they had trained these dogs to do many different things. You know, they were trying to understand how conditioned response and learning takes place. So he knew already detailed notes with all of his graduate students, you know, how all that works. He knew dog A could do trick numbers 7, 8, 9, and dog B could do trick number 1, 2, 3, 4, and dog C is far more intelligent than dog D and all this. He knew all this stuff. And he goes back and he says, let's see what's gone on with these dogs. And he learned that of all the 4 personalities, almost all of the dogs lost their training. For weeks, these dogs did not remember something that they could do in their sleep. And then he found that a couple of the personalities reacquainted themselves with their training very easily, but 2 seemed to have lost it entirely. In other words, their map had been wiped clean.
Oh.
This is an important thing because later researchers come along and find out that Pavlov's research had been taken quietly and without his knowledge to then implement brainwashing techniques in Korea with American soldiers and in China. It is a phenomenal story that we in the West are not familiar with. But what the Chinese did, what the Russians did, what the North Koreans did was say, well, if it works on dogs, maybe it'll work on humans. And what they learned was you can take certain personality types, put them under enough stress, and it will wipe the slate clean and they will totally change. That's why in the previous poll, Eric, that you put up, I asked the question, have you ever known anybody who quickly became a new religion or changed religions? Have you ever known anybody that's changed religions multiple times and became very, very devout in those various religions? That's probably what was going on. Now, Todd, I want to ask you to give us one of your stories. You had a story or 2 that fit that pretty well. Tell us a story about the conversion, the people you've known that have converted radically, and what were the conditions under which they converted, and yourself, by the way. You gave us a story about yourself, too.
Yeah. When I was 18, I left my home and my religious upbringing, and I left that for about 4 years. And towards the end of that time, I had some personal crisis that came into my life. My dad was killed by a drunk driver. I was in a bad motorcycle accident. My girlfriend of 2 years left me for a doctor. But a lot of things that was really personal crisis for me. And I was being told that it was God calling me back. Like a father, God punishes those that he loves. And he was trying to bring me back, and I ended up coming back into the Christian faith because of that.
That is like a quintessential story. Over and over again, we hear that. When people are under a lot of stress, when there's a death in the family, when you get a serious illness, when you get a diagnosis, could be fatal, when your mother dies, I mean, any of those things brings tremendous stress upon a family or on an individual. Excuse me. That is why ministers love to proselytize in the hospital, proselytize in prisons, proselytize when you're sick, proselytize when there's been is there a funeral. I was so pissed off when my dad died, and I went back to my home church, and 3/4 of the sermon around my dad's funeral. And my dad was a wonderful guy with a tremendous amount of story to be told, and he didn't tell any of it. This minister even knew my dad very well, and he spent 3/4 of the darn sermon proselytizing.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, when my mother died 3 years later, I went to that same minister and said, Mr. Minister, I won't use his name. Oh, by the way, the church just closed last year, which was delightful. I said, I'm an atheist, and here's the deal. You're going to get up and you're going to do a damn good sermon, and it's going to tell my mom's story, and some of the people in the church are going to stand up and tell my mom's story. And if I catch you proselytizing even for one sentence, I will stand up in the front of this whole congregation and stop this service.
Wow.
Yeah, his eyes got about that big. Oh, I would never do that.
Oh my gosh.
And he did not do that, which was good. My parents are very religious, and they even became missionaries, but they weren't assholes, and they were more concerned about humans than about Jesus in many ways. And I wanted that story to be told, so that's why I did that. That's a side issue.
This is a real pet peeve of mine, and kind of personally triggering for me. Just in the past 2 years, I've had 3 close friends that passed away. And each of these cases, the funerals were turned into an invitation to come to Jesus type thing. This last October, I'll just tell you the one story. This last October, I was on a group ride on my bike, and there was about 32 of us in our group, and a good friend of mine lost control when we were coming down a mountain and went over the edge of the drop off and was killed. And I was there. I was the first one to him, but I couldn't save him. But the point is, at the funeral, there was an altar call, and they used my friend Jim as an example of God's saving grace. You know, they told how Jim was part of the church's Celebrate Recovery, and because of his addiction to porn, and how God had delivered him from porn. Yeah. And that this same God can deliver you. And that was the invitation at his funeral. And it's so frustrating.
That's awful. And I'm looking at the poll here. 77% of the folks who took the poll have been to a funeral where they've been proselytized to, and like I said, I've been through the same one. I won't share the story, but it's disgusting to me. It's as if there was a salesman up front trying to sell us their bullshit. While I'm grieving for the loss of my
right.
Oh yeah, I refuse to go to funerals anymore that are Christian funerals. I will say my goodbyes before, and I won't go to the funerals.
Well, therein lies why we're talking about this today, because it's not just funerals, it's not just being in prison, it's not just in the hospital. It's whenever you're in a crisis, and our entire society is now in a crisis. This is a absolutely opportune time for religions to infect new people. And they're trying their best, and they're going to try their best. The second thing is, it's also an opportune time for political ideas as well, because a lot of political ideologies look a lot like religion. And we've seen a real alliance between political parties and religions in the current time period and in the past. You know, I don't care what period of time you're in. Religion is always trying to get into the political system and take it over. And the best example we can have right now is to look at Saudi Arabia. The religion and the politics are one and the same. You couldn't separate Islam from Saudi Arabian politics. It's just impossible. And it's almost as impossible in some place like Pakistan or Bangladesh, where people are getting murdered if they don't toe the Muslim line. So I want to move ahead and talk a little bit about how this actually worked in real life during a time of the 1720s, 1740s. I have my dates a little bit off. A man named John Wesley, you may know him. If you were a former Methodist, you know who John Wesley was. And what you probably don't know, and they do not teach at a Methodist church. I went to a Methodist seminary. They did not teach this to me in that seminary. John Wesley was like a master mass hypnotist. He could get 1,000 people in a tent revival in the 1740s with no amplification. He could pretty much hypnotize 1,000 people, get them rolling in the aisles, and convert to Jesus. That's how the Methodist Church got started in England. And that's what happened when Charles and John Wesley came to the United States. They did the same thing here. And what we know, and you can read it right in a little book. I will semi-recommend this book. Semi-recommend. Because it goes over some of the stuff I talk about, but it was written in 1957. So you've got to take into consideration it's old. It's got a lot of medical technology that's way out of date. It's got some attitudes that you and I probably wouldn't agree with, but the concept and the knowledge is priceless. And what I want to read is what happened with this man, William Sargent. The name of the book is Battle for the Mind by William Sargent. And what he did was he studied John Wesley's principles of conversion and preaching. And what we see today when we see Pentecostal ministers or Baptist ministers, when you see a Billy Graham type person stand up, they are using the methods, the psychological methods that John Wesley pioneered. Now, I say pioneered. I shouldn't use that term in the sense that he invented them. He just kind of put the package together better than anybody else had. Because we can go clear back to Paul. We can go clear back to Pentecost, and we can see supposedly 3,000 people rolling in the aisles and converting to Jesus. Sounds to me like what you see in John Wesley. So in the United States and in other times in history, whenever a society shows signs of high stress, you oftentimes see revivals. You see, think of the Middle Ages when the plague came through, and how the Catholic Church used the flagellants to go around and kill all the Jews because they were poisoning the wells and stuff. It was a religious reaction to the stress of literally millions of people dying in 1348. So if you read your history, it's replete with the way epidemics cause religious revivals or come in on the back of religious revivals come in on the back of epidemics. So here's what Dr. Sargent says. I'm just going to read one small paragraph. If a complete sudden collapse can be produced by prolonging or intense emotional stress, the brain slate may be wiped clean temporarily of its more recently implanted patterns of behavior, perhaps allowing others to be substituted for them more easily. It sounds exactly what Pavlov found in his dogs. A certain portion of the population, you can literally reprogram them if you put them under enough stress. Do you know anybody in your household or in your family that's under a lot of stress because they watch Fox News over and over and over again? I'm guessing you probably do. And the messages are going straight through the amygdala into the hippocampus and creating a fear map in their brain. That's why it's so hard. It takes a lot of stress to change this map to something else. And what Eric showed us earlier was the stress has had a positive response of people wearing their masks. So we know it's had a new positive map has been created in those people. But I'm guessing other people who live just as close to Eric are also watching Fox News and getting scared. This is end times, or they're watching some religious program every day, and it's end times, and they're getting scared of hell. And the new messages, or the messages of that religion, are being pushed into their brains. The best time to re-indoctrinate somebody or to reinforce the indoctrination is when they're under stress and they're in a lot of confusion. That's what the potential is right now, and that's why we're talking here tonight.
So I can kind of see what you're talking about, and it's almost like, so a virus, it is basically just a shell with some instructions inside, some RNA instructions inside. And I can totally see the metaphor goes, the metaphor from a regular virus to a mental virus goes, it follows even further with this packaged message that is packaged inside of this mental virus that is injected into the folks who listen to it and take it in during the times of fear.
Yeah, that's right. It's just an instruction set. If you think about Catholicism or you think about Pentecostalism, it's an instruction set, and that's why we call it a mind virus. It has many of the same characteristics. I just saw Jack Cooley, I think, ask a question. Jack's a friend of mine. He said, do we expect a revival? I don't know that we'll see a revival or not. I just know that the religion, we see evidence right now, religion's taken as much advantage as it can right now. Here, I live in Kansas. Our governor says no meetings, no church meetings. And what happens? You know, we got a half a dozen churches and we're going anyway because you can't violate our rights. And you see the guy, Governor of Kentucky, say, you go to church, we're going to look at your license plate and we're going to make you quarantine, which, well, they're taking away our rights. You know, I would rather spread the God virus and risk spreading the biological virus is basically what they're saying.
Yeah, that seems like it's kind of inconsistent because on the one hand, the church doesn't want the government to take away their rights, but on the other hand, they want to control the government and they want to make new laws for everyone to abide by.
Yeah, I actually write about this quite extensively in the God virus, because what happens if the religion can take control of government, it makes it a lot safer for the religion to impose itself on everybody. A theocracy, if you will, whether that's the Catholic theocracy in 14th century Italy or the Muslim theocracy in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan right now, the competition of ideas is difficult for religions. Religions don't like to have to compete with other religions, and they certainly don't like competing with secularism. And so if you can get rid of the secular people and make the country or the political system friendly to your religion, it's a lot less work. Oh, and by the way, you get money. You may get the tax money. That's why separating of church and state is so important, because the resources of the government become at the beck and call of their religion. I mean, we just see a bill here this week that's going to allow the money from the government to go into the coffers of ministers and pay the salaries of ministers. Your tax dollars are going to pay ministers. That's what happens when the religion can capture the political system. And we're so close to having a political system that is totally captured by the religion. So I want to just frame this out. I know we're almost gone an hour here and I want to wind it up, but I want you to think back about a couple things. Remember the conversion of St. Paul. If you went to church, you read your Bible, you know about St. Paul. It's a famous story in Acts. Well, the conversion was of a man who hated Christianity and was persecuting them, even taking them back with handcuffs back to be tried. That was the story in Acts. And Paul converted through some vision or whatever. I don't believe the story for a minute, but here's the deal. The story is so true. What William Sargent, what other researchers have found is if you hate something enough, at some point you might flip under a stressful condition. So St. Paul hates the Christians and he's out persecuting them, and then one day a flash goes on in his brain and suddenly he flips and becomes the greatest Christian ever. We have seen this a lot. You see this in conversion stories throughout Christianity and Islam, is the flip from hating to loving. You can also get the opposite flip. So what William Sargent discovered and other researchers have discovered is if we want to stay mentally hygienic, if we want to stay clean and not let mind viruses infect us, we've got to use the scientific method, use good rational methods to maintain a sense of objectivity about a new idea and remain some social distancing, if you will, from ideas that bring dangerous consequences. So if we can find a way to examine ideas, examine ideologies, then we can keep the mind viruses from getting into us. And I don't care what political persuasion you are. Don't get me wrong. I'm a rabid liberal, so I'm not gonna hide that. But it doesn't matter whether you're a liberal, you're a Democrat, you're a libertarian or Republican. It doesn't matter. All political persuasions have an element of ideology in them, and ideology is not very nuanced. Nazism was an ideology. Communism ideology. I mean, we can name lots and lots of ideologies. Catholicism is an ideology. Baptist is an ideology. So we just have to be careful to recognize that the world has ideologies. You've got to have an ideology or you won't have a cohesive group as a political unit, for example. But let's not let our ideologies determine who we are. And let's be careful about what mind viruses we let get into our heads. I have about another hour's worth of stuff I could talk about, but I think you would kick me out if I did.
I think maybe we can consider doing a part 2 in the future of this and continue this conversation, because this is a topic that will not be going away anytime soon, and it is just thick with stuff we can learn. There are a lot of people in the chat kind of asking if this God virus, this religious virus that you're talking about, has is similar to folks who subscribe to conspiracy theories. There's a lot of hot ones right now, like Bill Gates and the vaccine, or the 5G crap, or what have you. How are the religions and conspiracy theories kind of connected?
Well, they're just another ideology, if you will. And the fact is that they're ideas that spring up. You know, some idiot came up with the idea that vaccines are bad, and they preyed upon the fears of parents. So every parent is scared to death. You know, they want to make sure their child is raised healthy and they want to get the best care. Well, if you start a rumor that vaccines are bad, then parents start reacting to that rumor negatively and not getting the kids vaccinated. That's the way mind viruses spread. They have to spread from one brain to the other. Flat earthers. Whoever heard of a flat earther 20 years ago, and now they're all over the place. I mean, it's funny to see how many flat earthers there are now. Now, maybe they were there before, but they're coming out of the woodwork now. You know, anti-vaxxers and on all the conspiracy stuff. The conspiracy theorists are always with us. They're always around. But with the internet, they have a megaphone. And if they can get a group to agree to them and help them propagate it, then that mind virus moves through minds. It moves, and then these days, mind viruses are going through computers to other minds. It used to be I had to go to your house to talk to you about an idea, or I had to write you a long letter about an idea. Well, now I just get on here and talk about my crazy idea on the internet, and it spreads much faster.
There's another question here I want to ask. Is there a tip in determining if a new idea is a result from fear or facts? How can we determine? Well,
I think one of the best tools we've got as secularists, and I love Anthony Magnabosco's work, is street epistemology. And I think the questions that street epistemology forces us to ask, while not perfect, will help you get to a more rational conclusion. The most fundamental philosophical approach in all of history is the Socratic method. So if you are being subjected to new ideas, I would always try to use some street epistemology methodology or techniques in examining those ideas. Now, the thing is, and this is probably one of the more important things I'm going to say tonight. Human beings, we are, as a group, incredibly good at fooling ourselves. Mm-hmm. we are so damn good at fooling ourselves that we really can't trust our minds. And I include my own. I have made some dumb mistakes in my life. And I thought they were perfectly rational decisions at the time. And now I look back and say, how could I be that dumb? And every person I'm speaking to tonight has had one or more of those events in your life. And you look back, what was going on in your life at that time? It might have been you're under a lot of stress.
Yeah, I've
Might
even
have been
pictures to prove it.
or you might have not had the tools. I mean, let's say you're an 18-year-old and you decide to commit your life to Jesus. What the hell does an 18-year-old know about the real world? Do they have a very good map in their head? Do they have the rational tools to make decisions like that? No, probably not. So I think as you get older, a friend of mine just said something the other day I thought was brilliant. He says, I'm the smartest today as I've ever been. I was not as smart as I am today as I was 5 years ago. And I certainly am smarter than I was 20 years ago. And I hope that's the way we look at it. We are constantly updating our maps, and our maps allow us to exercise our intelligence. And I would hope that if you're a flat earther, for example, or if you're an anti-vaxxer, you would have used some tools to examine that stance and tried to find out what is the map that most focuses on what's reality. What's the biological reality of viruses? What's the cosmological reality of orbits around planets, around large objects like the sun that has a gravity around it? I mean, these are things you can ask yourself, and none of us are going to be perfect in our answers.
Right.
But these tools are far better than listening to a news show. I'm skeptical every time I listen to any news, but I'm not so skeptical that I let my brains fall out.
Now you're talking a lot about some things to practice, and it seems like you're coming from the standpoint of like critical thinking and thinking rationally. But a lot of folks are asking, how can we deal with the fear that we experience? So rationality and fear are almost like not connected in some sense. And what would be a good way to kind of get over the fear and then come back to rationality or encourage this rationality and critical thinking?
Well, first of all, I would suggest people go back. We recorded last week's segment and go back and listen to that because we actually talked about some of that last week. Also, look at the video that I did about a month ago. Before this whole thing got super underway, I thought, let's sit down and do a video, and we did that. With the help of one of our great volunteers, put some graphics into it. But either watch those two videos, because in those videos I talk about here's what you can do. And I'll give you the short version. First of all, you can just stop and take 3 deep breaths. Just take a deep breath, because if you keep breathing shallowly and keep thinking all the horrible thoughts that are happening, you're going to keep getting more. You're going to spiral down and down and down. It's a negative feedback loop. Second thing is you might learn some meditation techniques. Get on, download Sam Harris's great application on mindfulness or waking up. You can learn mindfulness techniques. And we've got some therapists right here watching this tonight that are well trained in these areas. So and in the future, Todd, Eric, and everybody else, we're going to be doing some shows right like this in the future weeks where we're going to be talking about those very things. We think that Recovering from Religion can supply really high quality mental health programming through this format to people literally all over the world. We got people watching from Australia tonight and England. So we know that we can reach a wide range of people, and we have therapists in Australia and England. We have people that can provide this content. So that's what we're planning on doing in the near future, is giving answers to that very question.
You know what, Darrel, that take a 3 deep breaths seems super simple, but it works. The other night, to give a testimony, My mind was going 100 miles an hour. I had some interviews to do with some new agents, and just my mind wouldn't stop. And I went, take 3 deep breaths, concentrate on my big toe, and those thoughts went away, and I concentrated on my breathing, and I fell asleep. And I was like, I was gonna get up the next morning and tell you about it, but I forgot. So it works.
It's such a simple technique, and it really does. It's not a perfect thing, but it works so many times. 3 deep breath, and it's a joke kind of, but I always use it that way. Focus on your left big toe. 3 deep breaths, focus on your left big toe. It's hard to focus on anything else when you start doing that.
You know, and I took your advice too over the last week, and I went out and saw the sun every day when it was out. Went and found a basketball court and was just shooting some hoops by myself. In fact, it started to feel so good yesterday here in Denver, Colorado. It was snowing outside, but it wasn't sticking to the asphalt. And so I'm like, I think the basketball court might be clear. And I went out in the snow and shooting hoops, and it felt really good. And that the anxiety I was experiencing just sort of melted away temporarily. And it was a good relief and relaxation technique.
Guys, this has been great, but we're over our hour limit here, and I want to end with one more question, if we could, and then we'll open up to some. Turn it over to Gail. Gail has an announcement to make and do a little talk. What resources would you recommend besides the God virus? Would you recommend in trying to help us with this type of remapping our minds?
I think, like I mentioned, Sam Harris's application on mindfulness, but there's a lot of different websites nowadays, and there's mental health websites that you can learn these skills. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help you a lot in trying to understand how to deal with anxiety. And so we defined anxiety last week: free-floating fear not based in reality. That's my simple definition for it. Go back and listen to it. But I think there's anxiety reduction techniques, and all these things are, let me just say this. You guys living today are so fucking lucky, because I didn't have any of those 30 years ago when I was learning how to be a therapist, or 40 years ago. I couldn't get on the internet and learn a mindfulness exercise, and yet we can do that today. Now, you can go to a therapist and they will teach you these things, because any therapist worth their salt knows mindfulness, knows cognitive behavioral therapy, probably knows some other things like dialectical behavioral therapy. I mean, there's a lot of things they should know. But bottom line, there's probably not a good therapist on the planet that doesn't know cognitive behavioral therapy, because it's kind of like the baseline, the foundation for a lot of other things. And you can learn those, you can get online and use a website for it, or you can get one of the Sector Therapy Project therapists to help you. Or you can come back here, because we're going to be putting some of that programming on in the next month or two. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, Dr. Ray, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today and talking about this. It cleared up some things for me, and I can understand other people a little bit better. And I know that the person that I can change the most is myself, and so I'll be using some of those suggestions that you gave, and to hopefully inoculate myself against this virus that comes about it. So we'll wrap it up there. I've got one more poll to put up, but next week we have another RfRx talk coming up. And Todd, you want to tell them all about it?
Sure. We are having Dr. Darrel back on, along with Dr. Hector Garcia. And we are going to be talking about religious trauma. So this is going to be a great time. It's going to be more of a conversation between Dr. Darrel and Dr. Hector Garcia. Eric and I will probably sit more in the background. So this will be a really good time together.